Welcome to the quietest corner of the village. We knew you'd find us eventually.
Chapter 1. The best laid schemes. If there was one thing Agatha Raisin hated more than mud in the Cotswolds, it was being upstaged. Especially by a woman who looked like a dehydrated ferret and dressed exclusively in varying shades of beige. Penelope Pringle, the newly installed chatelaine of the manor house in Merewether, a neighbouring village that Carsely viewed with deep, historical suspicion, had decided to host a midsummer solstice garden party. It was, Agatha reflected bitterly while aggressively applying a layer of viper-red lipstick, a blatant grab for social dominance. Agatha glared at her reflection in the gilded mirror of her Merewether cottage. Her hair, usually a chic, expensive ash blonde bob, was currently fighting a losing battle against the high humidity. Her heels were too high for a garden. Her silk dress, a stunning sapphire blue that matched her eyes when she wasn't scowling, was already clinging uncomfortably, and her mood was foul. "It's not as if I wanted to go," she informed her cats, Hodge and Boswell, who were watching her with supreme indifference from the bed. "But one has to support neighbouring communities, even if they are full of stuck-up, nouveau-rich social climbers like Penelope." The real reason Agatha was going, however, had nothing to do with community spirit and everything to do with James Lacey, her handsome, maddeningly elusive neighbour, retired military historian and the current object of Agatha's tempestuous, largely unrequited affection, had accepted Penelope's invitation. Agatha had spent the last 2 weeks subtly probing James for details about his weekend plans, only to discover, through Mrs. Broxby, the vicar's wife and fountain of all accurate knowledge, that James was attending the Pringle dinner. He hadn't even mentioned it to Agatha. "Men," Agatha snapped, snapping her compact shut with a sound like a pistol shot. "Who needs them?" The correct answer was Agatha. Agatha needed them, specifically James, to validate her decision to move to the countryside in the first place. Giving up a successful, hard-nosed PR career in London for early retirement in the picturesque Cotswolds had seemed like a dream. The reality often involved more boredom, rain, and competitive baking than she had anticipated. She stomped downstairs, grabbed her clutch bag, and stormed out to her car, a sleek silver BMW that looked entirely too aggressive for the winding country lanes. The manor house was less than 2 miles away, but by the time Agatha arrived, her temper had reached a simmer. The driveway was packed with cars that screamed old money, Range Rovers, and new ambition, sports cars. Agatha's PR brain immediately categorized the event high social stakes. She parked with military precision, smoothed her dress, slapped on a bright, brittle smile, and marched toward the main lawn. It was unfortunately perfect. Penelope Pringle had clearly hired high-end caterers. White marquees were strategically placed to capture the best views of the rolling Cotswold hills. A string quartet played softly in the background, and waiters in crisp white shirts floated among the guests carrying silver trays of champagne. "Agatha, darling!" a voice cooed, vibrating with false warmth. Penelope Pringle appeared, draped in a shapeless, expensively textured beige linen dress. Beside her, she looked like a fashionable bird of prey that had just swallowed a very smug mouse. "Penelope," Agatha replied, her tone just short of an insult. "What a large gathering. Oh, I see you spared no expense on the champagne. Let's hope it's better than the local bubbly Mrs. Henderson serves." Penelope laughed, a shrill, brittle sound. "Oh, Agatha, you are so amusing. We only serve the vintage Veuve Clicquot. It's important to have standards, don't you think? And is that dress this season? The colour is so brave." Agatha felt her jaw clench. She was about to deliver a retort about the relative merits of courage versus wearing a sack when she spotted James. He was standing near the edge of the lawn, looking infuriatingly dashing in a linen suit, engaged in what appeared to be a fascinating conversation with an elegant brunette. "If you'll excuse me, Penelope," Agatha interrupted, turning away mid-sentence. "I see someone I must speak to." She marched across the lawn, dodging slow-moving villagers and minor gentry. By the time she reached James, the elegant brunette had moved on, and James was looking at his watch. "Hello, James," Agatha said, positioning herself directly in his line of sight and treating him to her most winning PR smile. "Surprised to see you here. You usually hate these kinds of crush." James started slightly. "Oh, Agatha, yes. Well, Penelope invited me and, well, history of the manor, you know. Good research opportunity." "Are you well? You seem a bit flushed." "It's the humidity, James," Agatha said crossly. "It is midsummer, after all. Why didn't you mention you were coming? We could have carpooled." James looked slightly panicked, a look Agatha knew well. It meant she was getting too close. "Didn't think of it, to be honest. I came early. Had to check a date on a plaque." "Ah, Before Agatha could press him further, perhaps demanding a ride home later, a booming voice cut through the ambient chatter and the string quartet. "Penelope, my love! You outdo yourself every year." Agatha turned with everyone else. Entering the lawn with the subtlety of a brass band was Percival Percy Swinburne, the local grandee and undisputed king of Merworth's social hierarchy. He was a large man, red-faced, with a booming voice and a fondness for loud tweed jackets, even in summer. Today he was in a white Panama hat and a cream-coloured suit that was straining at the seams. Percy was flanked by his dowdy, downtrodden wife, Sheila, and a younger, slick-looking man Agatha didn't recognise, who seemed to be acting as his shadow. Percy Swinburne was rich, loud and influential. He owned half the property in Merworth and liked to treat the entire village as his personal fiefdom. Agatha found him insufferable, but as a PR professional, she respected his branding. "Percy!" Penelope rushed to meet them, her beige drapery flapping. Agatha sighed loudly, and the court assembles for the king. "It's enough to make you sick." "He's an important man in the community, Agatha," James said mildly. "He sponsors the local cricket club and the church restoration. He also buys up charming cottages and rents them out for ridiculous prices, squeezing the life out of the village," Agatha countered. "I know his type," the party continued around them. Agatha tried unsuccessfully to engage James in conversation, but he kept scanning the crowd, distracted. She was just considering grabbing a third glass of champagne and giving up when Percy Swinburne decided to make his move. He clapped his hands together, silencing the near vicinity. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbours," Percy roared. "Penelope has put on a magnificent spread, as always, but I think it's time for a proper toast. Not with this buggle-water," he gestured dismissively at the champagne flute, "but with a real local blend I've had the pleasure of sampling. A pre-launch exclusive, courtesy of our own local artisan producer." He nodded, and the slick young man beside him stepped forward with a large unlabelled green glass bottle and a silver flask. Percy dramatically poured a measure from the flask, topped it with the contents of the bottle, and held up a large crystal glass filled with a deep amber, slightly cloudy liquid. "To Merworth," Percy proclaimed. "And to progress." He took a huge gulp of the drink. He swallowed, smacked his lips, and beamed. "Nectar of the gods," he declared. "Simply divide." The word died in his throat. His face, already red, turned a terrifying shade of purple. He dropped the crystal glass, which shattered on a stone paver with a sound like a small explosion, splattering amber liquid onto the hem of nearby dresses. Percy clutched his chest, his eyes bulging wildly. He tried to speak, but only a wet, choked gurgle emerged. He took a staggering step forward, then another backward, knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres that a passing waiter was holding. "My goodness," Agatha whispered, her irritation vanishing, replaced by cold observation. "He's putting on a show." "I don't think he's acting, Agatha," James said, his voice instantly dropping to a military crispness. He started moving forward. Percy Swinburne, the king of Merworth, gave one final, desperate rasp, and collapsed backward with a heavy thud onto Penelope Pringle's meticulously manicured rosebed. "Ah!" a woman screamed, the high-pitched sound cutting through the stunned silence. Champagne glasses were fumbled and dropped. Penelope Pringle looked horrified, but also, Agatha's dark little heart noted, furious that a dead man had just ruined her roses. James reached Percy first, kneeling beside him. He felt for a pulse, then looked up, shook his head once, decisively. Agatha felt a cold shiver run down her spine, and it wasn't the humidity. This was not the kind of drama she had expected at the Merworth Midsummer Solstice garden party. It was in fact something much more inconvenient for social life. A sudden, messy death in public. Agatha Raisin, looking at the broken glass, the spilled liquid, and the corpse of the most important man in the village, felt the first irresistible tug of a mystery. She glanced around the circle of horrified faces. Nearly everyone present looked shocked, but as Agatha's sharp PR eyes swept the crowd, she noted a few who looked less surprised than they should be, and one person who was looking not at the body, but at the broken glass on the path. "Well," Agatha muttered, the sharp, mosey instinct that her competitors had always feared beginning to buzz. This just became much more interesting than beige linen. Chapter 2. The Whispering Willows. The arrival of the police was, in Agatha's professional opinion, a PR disaster. Within 20 minutes, the tranquil lawns of the manor house were swarming with fluorescent jackets and static-heavy radios, effectively killing the midsummer vibe Penelope Pringle had spent thousands to curate. Must they park the van directly on the verge? Penelope wailed, clutching a glass of medicinal brandy. The blue lights are reflecting off the conservatory in the most ghastly way. Oh! Agatha, who was currently nursing a fresh gin and tonic shed, managed to liberate from a departing waiter's tray, didn't offer sympathy. A man has just died in your flower bed, Penelope. I think the aesthetic of your driveway is a secondary concern. But he was so loud about it, Penelope whispered, her eyes darting around to see who was listening. And that drink! What was that horrid amber stuff? Agatha's ears pricked up. She looked toward the spot where Percy had fallen. A young, fresh-faced detective was already cordoning off the area with yellow tape. It was Detective Sergeant Bill Wong, a man Agatha considered a protégé, a friend, and a frequent target for her unsolicited advice. "Bill!" Agatha called out, ducking under the tape with a nimbleness that defied her tight silk dress. "Mrs. Raisin," Bill sighed, not looking up from his notebook. "I should have known. Please step back. This is a potential crime scene." Potential? The man turned purple and dropped like a sack of spuds after drinking something called nectar. Agatha lowered her voice. It was that slick boy, Gavin Miller, Percy's little lapdog. He brought the bottle out. Bill finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of fondness and exasperation. Mr. Swinburne had a known heart condition, Agatha. At his age and with his robust lifestyle, a sudden collapse isn't exactly a conspiracy. But we've secured the glass and the bottle. Now, please, go home. You're hovering. I am not hovering, I am observing, Agatha snapped. She glanced around for James, but he was already being ushered away by a constable for a witness statement. He didn't even look back at her. The rejection stung more than the humid air. By the time Agatha reached her silver BMW, the village of Merworth was already vibrating with the news. In the Cotswolds, news didn't travel, it leaped like a brush fire. She drove back to her own village of Carsely in a state of agitated focus. Her detective instincts, which she tried to bury under layers of gardening and bridge clubs, were screaming. Percy Swinburne had not just died, he had been erased in front of the entire county. She didn't go home to Hodge and Boswell. Instead, she parked outside the Red Lion in Carsely. If there was a pulse to be felt, it was in the pub. The atmosphere inside was electric. Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar's wife, was sitting in her usual corner with a modest half-pint of shandy. She looked up as Agatha stormed in, her blue eyes filled with a quiet, knowing concern. "Agatha, dear, I heard the news. Truly dreadful for poor Sheila Swinburne." Agatha slid into the bench opposite her. Sheila will probably find she enjoys the silence. Percy was a blowhard. But the point is, Margaret, he was about to announce something. He called it progress. Everyone looked terrified. He was planning to redevelop the old spinney, a voice chimed in from the bar. It was Fred, the local butcher. Wanted to build a luxury wellness retreat with a helipad. Half of Merworth was up in arms. He was going to bulldoze the allotments next. And Penelope Pringle? Agatha asked. She seemed awfully cozy with him. Penelope wanted to be the retreat's social director, Fred snorted. She's been social climbing so hard, she's got altitude sickness. But Percy was also talking about changing his will. Word is he was going to cut Gavin Miller out of the development deal. Agatha leaned back, a predatory gleam in her eyes. So we have a village full of people losing their allotments. A wife who was treated like furniture, a social climber who needed his money, and a disgruntled assistant about to lose his meal ticket. It was likely a heart attack, Agatha, Mrs. Bloxby said gently. The police said as much. The police, Agatha said with immense scorn, think that if a man dies while holding a glass of poison, he probably died of the effort of lifting his arm. I saw his face, Margaret. That wasn't a heart attack. That was an insult to the vintage. She stood up, her mind already spinning. She needed to get back to Merworth. She needed to talk to the widow. But mostly, she needed to find out exactly what was in that green bottle. "Where are you going?" Mrs. Bloxby asked. "To find a black dress," Agatha said, her jaw set. "And to offer my sincere condolences to Sheila Swinburne. Someone needs to ask the questions Bill Wong is too polite to ask." As she walked out, she caught her reflection in the pub's window. Her hair was a mess, and her lipstick was smudged, but for the first time in months, Agatha Raisin didn't feel bored. She felt dangerous. Chapter 3. Condolences and cold comfort. Agatha's morning wardrobe was a masterclass in PR subtlety. A black wool suit that cost more than a small hatchback, a pillbox hat that suggested Jackie Kennedy with a hangover, and a pair of dark sunglasses to hide the fact that she was squinting at everyone's front gardens for clues. She arrived at the Swinburne estate, a sprawling, overly manicured pile called the Beeches, at precisely 11 o'clock the following morning. In village etiquette, this was the sweet spot for condolences late enough that the immediate shock had passed, but early enough to intercept the vicar and the goodwill casseroles. The front door was opened by Gavin Miller. Without his slick suit and the sunlight of the garden party, he looked sallow. His eyes were bloodshot, though Agatha privately doubted it was from grief more likely. He had spent the night calculating his dwindling commission. "Mrs. Raisin," Gavin said, his voice flat. "The police have only just left. Sheila isn't seeing anyone." "Nonsense, Gavin," Agatha said, stepping firmly over the threshold before he could close the door. "Sheila and I are, well, we share a certain understanding of the burdens of village life. I have brought a tin of Fortnum's biscuits, the expensive ones with the gold foil." She thrust the tin at him as if it were a weapon. Gavin, caught off guard, retreated. Agatha marched into the drawing room, which was filled with the oppressive scent of lilies and the ticking of a grandfather clock that sounded like a countdown to a social collapse. Sheila Swinburne was sitting by the window staring out at a topiary hedge. She looked smaller than she had at the party, her tweed skirt replaced by a black cardigan that seemed to swallow her shoulders. "Sheila, dear," Agatha cooed, dropping onto the sofa beside her. What a tragedy. To go like that, right into the roses. "Penelope is devastated, of course, mostly about the mulch, but we are all thinking of you." Sheila turned. Her eyes were dry. "Thank you, Agatha. It was very sudden. The doctor says his heart simply gave out." "The excitement of the announcement, I suppose. The progress announcement." Agatha leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A wellness retreat? I heard some people weren't exactly thrilled about the helipad." Sheila's lip curled slightly. Percy didn't care about the village. He cared about his legacy. He wanted to turn Merworth into a playground for people who drink green juice and wear lycra. He was going to sell the North Field to a London consortium tomorrow. "Tomorrow?" Agatha's eyebrows shot up. "That's very convenient timing for the villagers, then, and for the North Field. I hear the allotments are on that land." "The allotments, the old tithe barn, everything," Sheila said. She reached for a lukewarm cup of tea. Gavin was the one pushing him. "Gavin has debts, Agatha. Gambling debts from his London days. He needed that commission." Agatha glanced toward the door. Gavin was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the study. "And the drink, Sheila? That nectar Percy was so proud of? Who made it?" Sheila's hand jerked, slopping a bit of tea into the saucer. "A local girl, Siobhan Kelly. She runs that little organic shop in the high street. She's been experimenting with fermented honey and herbs. Percy thought it was authentic. He wanted to market it as the house drink for the retreat. Fermented honey, Agatha mused. Mead, essentially, but with herbs. Did he have any enemies, Sheila? Besides, well, everyone he was trying to evict?" Sheila looked Agatha directly in the eye. For a moment the dowdy housewife vanished, replaced by a woman who had spent 30 years being bullied by a loudmouth in tweed. "Percy was a man of appetites, Agatha. He didn't just want land. He wanted attention. He was seeing someone much younger. He was going to ask for a divorce once the deal went through." Agatha felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. A mistress. Now we were getting somewhere. "Do you know who?" "I have my suspicions," Sheila said, her voice turning cold. "But it doesn't matter now, does it? The king is dead. The land is safe. And I," she paused, a tiny, terrifying smile touching her lips, "am the sole executor of the estate. The North Field will remain exactly as it is." Agatha left the Beeches 10 minutes later, her mind whirring like a turbine. She had a disgruntled assistant with gambling debts, a wife who had just saved her home and her dignity, a village saved from a helipad, and a mysterious mistress. As she walked toward her car, she saw Gavin Miller standing by the garage, speaking heatedly on a mobile phone. He looked up, saw Agatha, and immediately turned his back, his posture stiff with guilt. Agatha didn't head home. Instead, she drove straight to the Merworth High Street. She needed to find Siobhan Kelly's organic shop. If Percy Swinburne had been poisoned, the nectar was the delivery system and Siobhan Kelly was the one who had brewed the batch. But as she pulled up to the shop, she noticed something that made her stomach do a nervous flip. A familiar, dusty Land Rover was parked at the curb. James Lacey was inside the shop, leaning over the counter, talking to a very pretty, very distressed-looking young woman with long red hair. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Agatha muttered, checking her lipstick in the rearview mirror. Not her too. She climbed out of the BMW, smoothed her black skirt, and marched toward the door. If James was investigating, she was going to be right there beside him, mostly to make sure he wasn't being too thorough with the ginger organic bottler. Hat to 4. The mistress of the mead, the bell above the door of the green larder, gave a cheerful, tinkling ring that felt entirely inappropriate given the circumstances. The shop smelled aggressively of dried lavender, damp earth, and that specific cloying scent of high-end organic vinegar. Agatha stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply on the flagstone floor. James and the redhead Siobhan presumably were huddled near a display of artisanal chutneys. Siobhan was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that looked like it had been hand-woven from nettles. "Agatha," James said, his voice tightening. He straightened up immediately, moving a respectable 6 inches away from the girl. "I thought you were at home resting. It's been a traumatic 24 hours. Resting is for the elderly and the unimaginative, James," Agatha snapped, her eyes raking over Siobhan. The girl was younger than she appeared from the car, perhaps mid-20s, with pale porcelain skin and a scatter of freckles that James probably found charming. Agatha found them suspicious. "I see you have already started your own research into the local brew." Siobhan let out a small, shuddering sob. "It's a nightmare. The police were here for hours. They took my entire stock of midsummer nectar. They think I'm a poisoner." "Well, dear, when the most important man in the village drops dead after a swig of your honey water, people do tend to jump to conclusions," Agatha said, moving toward a shelf of unlabeled jars. "It's all about the optics. And the optics are currently locally sourced lethality." "I didn't do anything," Siobhan cried. "I've made that recipe for years. It's just honey, spring water, yarrow, and a secret blend of herbs. My grandmother used it as a tonic." "Ah, did your grandmother also have a habit of clearing out local property developers?" Agatha asked, picking up a jar and peering at the sediment. "Agatha, please," James interjected, his face reddening. "Siobhan is a friend of a friend. I'm simply trying to help her reconstruct the timeline of the batch." "A friend of a friend," Agatha repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "How very convenient. And what has this reconstruction yielded, apart from a damp handkerchief?" James sighed, a sound of profound patience that usually made Agatha want to throw something. "Siobhan delivered the crate of bottles to the manor house on Friday evening. She left them in the pantry. Penelope's staff handled them from there." "And the flask?" Agatha asked, remembering the silver vessel Percy had used to pour the initial measure. "Percy didn't drink straight from your bottle, Siobhan. He mixed it with something from his own flask." Siobhan shook her head. "I don't know anything about a flask. He just told me he wanted a high-proof version for the toast. He said he would handle the fortification himself." Agatha froze. "Fortification? You mean he was adding alcohol to it?" "He usually added a splash of his own home-distilled gin," James supplied. Percy fancied himself a bit of a moonshiner. He had a small copper still in his garden shed. He called it Swinburne's Fire. Agatha's PR brain clicked into a new gear. "So we have a man who drinks a mixture of organic mead and homemade gin, and then dies. The police will blame the mead because it's the new variable. But what if the poison wasn't in the bottle Siobhan provided? What if it was in the flask?" "The police took the flask, Agatha," James said. "Bill Wong told me they found traces of aconite, monkshade." Agatha felt a chill. Monkshade was common in Cotswold gardens, beautiful, tall, purple spikes that were also incredibly deadly. "And who grows monkshade around here?" Siobhan looked away, her face turning even paler. "Everyone. It's a cottage garden staple. But..." She hesitated. "But what?" Agatha stepped closer, smelling the girl's herbal perfume. "Percy had a massive patch of it right behind his still," Siobhan whispered. "He used to joke that it kept the burglars away. He called it his devil's helmet garden." Agatha turned to James, her eyes wide. "He grows his own poison right next to the machine he uses to make his own gin. That's not a murder, James. That's an accident waiting to happen. Or," James countered, his voice low, "it's the perfect cover for a murder. If someone knew he was careless with his ingredients, or if they accidentally brushed some crushed leaves into his distilling batch." The bell tinkled again. This time it wasn't a villager looking for chutney. It was Detective Sergeant Bill Wong, looking tired and distinctly unhappy to see Agatha, Mrs. Raisin. "Mr. Lacey," Bill said, leaning against the doorframe. "I should have known this was a committee meeting." "Agatha, I've just come from the Swinburne place. We found something in Percy's still." "Monkshade?" Agatha asked triumphantly. "No," Bill said, his expression grim. "We found a letter. A very angry, very detailed letter from someone threatening to expose Percy's financial irregularities if he didn't stop the development of the North Field." Agatha felt her heart race. Signed by whom? Bill looked at Siobhan, then back at Agatha. It wasn't signed. But it was written on stationery from the Green Larder. Siobhan gasped and sank onto a stool. Agatha looked at the girl, then at the rows of organic goods. The case had just shifted from a tragic accident to a very deliberate frame-up, and Siobhan Kelly was sitting right in the centre of the bullseye. "Well," Agatha said, her voice regaining its sharp, professional edge as she looked at James. I think it's time we looked at who else had access to this shop's stationery, because if I know anything about PR, it's that the person holding the loudest protest sign is usually the one with the most to hide. Chapter 5. The Village Vultures. The Merworth Village Hall was a drafty Victorian edifice that usually smelled of floor wax and damp coats. Tonight, however, the air was thick with the scent of indignation and cheap perfume. Penelope Pringle had organised an emergency parish assembly, ostensibly to discuss the future of the North Field. But Agatha knew a looch mob when she saw one wearing pastel twinsets and pearls. Agatha arrived late, a tactical move designed to ensure all eyes were on her. She wore a tailored charcoal coat and a silk scarf tied with Parisian precision. James was already there, tucked into a back row next to Mrs. Bloxby. He gave Agatha a brief, stiff nod that she chose to interpret as "I've been pining for your arrival," rather than "please don't make a scene." "Quiet, everyone! Please." Penelope stood at the front, rapping a knitting needle against a mahogany lectern. "We are here to mourn Percival Swinburne, yes, but also to address the safety of our community. It has come to light that the very refreshments served at my home were tainted." A murmur rippled through the room like wind through wheat. "It's that Kelly girl," a voice shouted from the middle of the hall. It was Doris Frome, the village's premier gossip, and a woman whose flower arrangements were as sharp as her tongue. Always filling people's heads with organic nonsense. We all know she was leading the protest against Percy's retreat. Agatha stood up, her voice cutting through the chatter like a PR executive silencing a room of unruly journalists. "Oh, do sit down, Doris. Your bias is showing, and it's a very unflattering shade of green. Siobhan Kelly may be a bit earnest with her yarrow, but she isn't an idiot. Why would she poison a man in front of 50 witnesses using a bottle with her own label on it?" Penelope sniffed. "Agatha, you were not invited to speak. And besides, the police found a threatening letter on her stationery. The girl is clearly unstable. She was seen arguing with Percy only last Tuesday." "Everyone was arguing with Percy last Tuesday," Agatha countered, stepping into the aisle. "He was trying to turn the village into a parking lot for private jets. Gavin Miller was arguing with him. Sheila was surely tired of his appetites. Even you, Pennylarper, didn't he promise you a directorship that he was suddenly reconsidering?" The room went deathly silent. Penelope's face turned the colour of a ripened plum. "That is an outrageous slur, Agatha Raisin. I am a grieving friend." "You're a grieving social climber who just lost her ladder," Agatha muttered, though only loud enough for those in the front row to hear. She turned her gaze to Gavin Miller, who was sitting near the exit, looking twitchy. He was shredding a paper program into tiny, nervous confetti. "And what about you, Gavin?" Agatha raised her voice. "You're the one who poured the drink. You're the one who knew exactly which bottle Percy was going to open. Convenient that you're the one who found that letter for the police, isn't it?" Gavin jumped as if he had been prodded with a hot iron. "I didn't find it. Sergeant Wong found it. I was just assisting the investigation." "Assisting or directing?" Agatha challenged. "That's enough, Agatha," James said, standing up and taking her by the elbow. His touch was firm, and for a fleeting second, Agatha felt a thrill of classic romantic tension, before realizing he was essentially bouncing her from the meeting. He led her out into the cool night air of the parking lot. The moon was a sharp silver crescent, and the scent of wood smoke hung in the air. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" James sighed, though his eyes were not as angry as his voice. "You've just made an enemy of the entire parish council. They were already my enemies, James." "They just hadn't realized it yet," Agatha said, smoothing her coat. "Don't you see? It's too neat. The stationery, the protest, the unstable girl. It's a classic PR frame job. If I wanted to ruin a competitor, that's exactly how I would do it." "But Siobhan did have motive," James pointed out. "The North Field was her family's land 2 generations ago. She hated Percy for what he was doing to it. Motive is common, James. Opportunity is what matters. And whoever put that monkshit in the gin had to know exactly how Percy distilled his fire. They had to have access to his shed." Agatha paused, a memory flickering in her mind. A small social misstep shed witnessed at the party, just before the toast. "James," she whispered, her eyes widening. "At the party, right before Percy drank, Sheila Swinburne wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the bottle, but she wasn't looking at it with fear. Oh, she was looking at it with expectation. She's a grieving widow, Agatha. People stare when someone makes a loud speech." "No," Agatha insisted, her pride surging. She knew. "And I'll bet my best pair of Manolos that the mistress Sheila mentioned isn't a girl at all. It's a secret. Something Percy was using the North Field deal to cover up." Before James could argue, a car engine roared to life. Gavin Miller's beaten-up hatchback tore out of the parking lot, narrowly missing Agatha's BMW. He was driving as if the devil himself, or perhaps a very determined middle-aged woman in a charcoal coat, was chasing him. "Well," Agatha said, a predatory smile touching her lips, "I think it's time for a little breaking and entering. Or, as I prefer to call it, unauthorized site inspection." Chapter 6, The Shadow of the Helmet. James, don't be such a wet rag. "It's not breaking and entering if the gate was technically unlatched," Agatha whispered, though her voice carried quite well in the stillness of the Merworth night. "The gate was latched, Agatha." "You reached over and slid the bolt with a knitting needle you happened to have in your handbag," James retorted, though he was following her nonetheless, his footsteps silent on the gravel. They were creeping along the perimeter of the beaches. The moon provided just enough light to turn the manicured lawns into a silver-grey sea, and the towering topiary into hulking, monstrous shapes. Agatha was wearing her black stealth trainers, which were actually designer sneakers with slightly too much glitter, and a dark trench coat that made her feel like a glamorous spy, despite the fact that she had already tripped twice over a stray garden gnome. Agatha pointed toward a small stone outbuilding tucked away behind a dense screen of yew trees. "The distillery. And look, James, the Devil's Helmet Garden." The monkshood was a wall of deep, bruised purple, even in the moonlight. The hooded flowers stood tall and straight, looking like a silent army of executioners. Agatha felt a genuine shiver that had nothing to do with the night air. It was a beautiful, lethal patch of earth, situated exactly where a man might stumble into it while fumbling with a lock in the dark. "It's overgrown," James noted, crouching down. "Look at the stalks. Someone's been harvesting here recently, and not with garden shears. These have been snapped off in a hurry. Probably Percy, the old fool," Agatha said, though she didn't sound convinced. "If he was fortifying his gin, maybe he thought a little monkshood would give it a kick. Men are so stupid about their hobbies." "Aconite isn't a kick, Agatha. It's a cardiac arrest," James said grimly. He reached the door of the stone shed. To Agatha's immense satisfaction, it was slightly ajar. "Police must have been thorough," she muttered, nudging the door open with her elbow. The interior of the shed smelled of cold copper, fermented grain, and a sharp, medicinal tang that made Agatha's nose wrinkle. A small, professional-grade copper still sat on a sturdy wooden workbench, surrounded by jars of botanicals, juniper berries, dried orange peel, coriander seeds. Agatha began rifling through a stack of papers on a nearby desk with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent years auditing the desks of rival PR executives. Bills for copper piping, a catalogue for luxury yachts. Honestly, the man's ego was larger than the North Field, Agatha grumbled. "Wait, what's this?" Oh, she pulled a small, elegant velvet box from behind a jar of star anise. She flicked it open. Inside sat a gold brooch in the shape of a dragonfly, its wings encrusted with tiny, shimmering emeralds. "A gift for Sheila?" James asked, leaning over her shoulder. Agatha could smell his soap sandalwood and a hint of old books for a second. She forgot why they were in a damp shed. "Sheila?" Agatha scoffed, regaining her composure. "Sheila Swinburne wouldn't wear something this delicate. She likes things made of heavy gold that look like they belong on a horse's bridle." "No, James. This is for the mistress," the someone much younger Sheila mentioned. "It's expensive," James noted. "Exorbitant," Agatha corrected. "And look at the date on the receipt tucked inside the lining. It was purchased 3 days ago in London. Percy was planning to give this to someone at the party." She tucked the box into her pocket. "And I think I know who. Siobhan Kelly is poor as a church mouse, so it isn't her. But Penelope Pringle, she has a very similar dragonfly motif on her stationery." "You think Penelope was Percy's mistress?" James sounded skeptical. "She's hardly much younger." "To a man like Percy, much younger is anyone who doesn't remember the Blitz," Agatha said. "But look at this, James. Under the workbench." She pointed to a small, discarded scrap of fabric caught on a splinter of wood. It was a pale, distinctive shade. "Beige," Agatha whispered, her eyes narrowing. "Linen. The exact fabric of Penelope's sack dress from the party." Suddenly, the heavy thud of a car door echoed from the driveway. Headlights swept across the frosted windows of the shed, illuminating the copper still in a terrifying flash of amber light. "Oh, someone's here," James hissed, grabbing Agatha's arm and pulling her into the shadows behind the workbench. "If it's the police, I'm telling them you kidnapped me," Agatha whispered frantically. The shed door creaked open further. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight. They weren't wearing a police uniform. They were wearing a long, dark coat, and in their hand they held something that glinted with a dull, metallic sheen. Agatha held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The figure stepped into the room, moving with a strange, frantic energy. They went straight for the workbench, their hands searching the very spot where Agatha had found the brooch. A low, frustrated growl escaped the intruder's feminine sound, sharp and desperate. "Where is it?" the voice hissed. Agatha recognized that voice. It wasn't Penelope Pringle. It was Sheila Swinburne. The grieving widow wasn't looking for a memento. She was looking for evidence. And as she turned, the moonlight caught her face, revealing a look of such cold, calculated fury that Agatha realized Sheila wasn't the victim of a philandering husband. She was the director of his final act. Chapter 7. The widow's sting. Agatha held her breath so forcefully her lungs began to ache. Beside her, James was a statue of military precision, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, gesture that, in any other circumstance, would have sent Agatha into a flutter of romantic triumph. Now it was merely a tether to reality. Sheila Swinburne was less than 3 feet away. The grieving widow was tossing jars of botanicals aside with a clinical, cold efficiency. On was the downtrodden woman in the oversized cardigan. In the pale wash of the moonlight, Sheila looked like a predatory bird picking through the ruins of a nest. "Where is it, you old lecher?" Sheila hissed, her voice a jagged blade. "I know you bought it. I saw the credit card statement." She swept a row of glass vials off the workbench. They shattered on the stone floor with a series of sharp, musical pops. Agatha flinched, her glittery trainers shifting slightly on the grit. Sheila froze. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the deep shadows behind the copper still. Agatha's mind raced. "If she finds us, I'll say we were looking for the bathroom." "No, that's ridiculous." "I'll say I'm doing a PR audit of the estate's assets." "Yes." Much more professional. "Is someone there?" Sheila whispered. She picked up a heavy glass decanter from the bench, holding it like a club. Just as Sheila took a step toward their hiding spot, a sudden, high-pitched murmur erupted from the doorway. A large ginger tomcatone of the many semi-feral strays that patrolled the Merworth estate wandered into the shed, its tail twitching with disdain. It paused, sniffed at a puddle of spilled gin, and looked up at Sheila with glowing green eyes. Sheila exhaled, a ragged, shaky sound. Bloody cat. She turned back to the desk, gave it one final, frustrated shove, and marched out of the shed. Agatha and James waited, listening to the crouch of her footsteps retreating toward the main house, followed by the distant, heavy thud of the kitchen door. That, Agatha exhaled, sagging against James, was entirely too close for comfort. "My heart is doing things it hasn't done since I landed the Mark Spencer account." "She was looking for the brooch," James said, his voice low and urgent. "Oh, she knows about the affair, Agatha. She's known for a while." "Of course she knew," Agatha said, pulling the velvet box from her pocket and admiring the emerald dragonfly one last time before tucking it away. The downtrodden wife act was a performance. She wasn't waiting for him to die, she was waiting for the right moment to ensure he didn't take the estate with him. "We need to get out of here," James said, guiding her toward the door. They slipped out of the shed, keeping to the shadows of the yew trees. The Monkshade garden seemed even more sinister now, the purple hoods appearing like silent witnesses to Sheila's fury. They reached the BMW and sat inside for a moment, the silence of the car a blessed relief after the tension of the distillery. "So," James said, gripping the steering wheel, "Sheila has motive. She knew about the mistress, she hated the development deal, and she knew exactly where the monastery was. She could have easily slipped it into his gin batch while he was distracted." "It's too easy, James," Agatha said, pulling down the sun visor to check her lipstick by the vanity light. She looked slightly haggard, but her eyes were bright with the thrill of the chase. "Sheila is smart. If she was going to kill him, why do it at a party where everyone would see? Why not just let him accidentally drink a bad batch in the shed?" "Because," James countered, doing it at the party frame's Siobhan Kelly, "it provides a scapegoat and a village full of witnesses to a tragic accident caused by organic mead." Agatha hummed, a sound of deep dissatisfaction. "Maybe. But there's still the matter of the mistress. If Sheila was looking for that brooch, it means she hasn't found out who the woman is yet. She's jealous, James. Murderously jealous. But if she didn't have the brooch, she didn't have the proof." She paused, a thought striking her like a bolt of lightning. "James, think back to the party. Penelope Pringle was acting like she owned the place, but she wasn't the one hovering near Percy. It was Gavin Miller. And Gavin was the one who found the letter on Siobhan's stationery. You think Gavin and the mistress are linked?" "I think," Agatha said, her PR brain clicking into a high-speed strategy, "that we've been looking at this as a village drama when we should be looking at it as a hostile takeover. Someone wanted Percy dead, the land saved, and the blame placed squarely on a girl who couldn't defend herself. She turned to James, a wicked glint in her blue eyes. "I think it's time I had a very private chat with Gavin Miller. A man with gambling debts is a man who can be bought or broken with the right kind of pressure." "Agatha, be careful," James warned. "Gavin is desperate." "Desperation is just another word for opportunity in my business, James," Agatha snapped, putting the car into gear. "Now, let's go. I need a gin that hasn't been made in a shed, and I need to plan a confrontation that will make Penelope Pringle's garden party look like a vicarage tea." Chapter 8. The stakes are high. The Cotswold Edge racing track was a far cry from the manicured lawns of Merworth. It was a place of mud, diesel fumes, and men in flat caps who looked like they hadn't seen a vegetable since the coronation. For Agatha, standing in her cream-coloured wool coat and Italian leather boots, it was like being on another planet, one where the inhabitants were suspiciously fond of spitting. "I don't know why we're here, Agatha," James grumbled, adjusting his binoculars. He looked deeply uncomfortable, as if he expected a stray horse to bite him at any moment. "Gavin Miller is a small-time gambler. This is hardly the place for a high-stakes confrontation." "That's exactly why he's here, James," Agatha said, her eyes scanning the crowd with the predatory precision of a hawk. "A man who owes money to the wrong people doesn't go to a Scot. He goes to a place where he can blend into the mud. And look, there he is, by the bookie with the loud waistcoat." Gavin Miller looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 days. His expensive suit was crumpled, his skin had the greyish tint of a wet sidewalk, and his hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped his betting slip. Agatha didn't wait for James. She marched through the crowd, ignoring the glares from the regulars, and planted herself directly in front of Gavin. "Hedge your bets, Gavin?" Agatha asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Or are you just trying to win back enough to pay off the people who are currently looking for your kneecaps?" Gavin jumped, nearly knocking over a plastic cup of lukewarm tea. "Mrs. Raisin!" What are you doing here?" "I'm here to return something," Agatha said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out the gold dragonfly brooch. She held it up, the emeralds glinting in the dull afternoon light. "I found this in Percy's shed, right next to the still." "You remember the still, don't you? The one where the monkshood was accidentally processed?" Gavin's face went from grey to a stark, terrifying white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Agatha said, stepping closer until she was well within his personal space. "This brooch wasn't for Penelope Pringle, and it certainly wasn't for Sheila. This was for Siobhan Kelly. Percy wasn't just patronising her shop, Gavin. He was planning to run away with her. That's what the progress plan was really about, wasn't it? Selling the land, taking the money, and leaving everyone, including you, in the dust." Gavin let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "Running away? Percy? He didn't love that girl. He was using her. The progress plan wasn't a retreat, and it wasn't a romance. It was a scam, Agatha. A massive, fraudulent land grab." Agatha blinked. "A scam?" "The London Consortium didn't exist," Gavin hissed, his eyes darting around the track. "Percy had set up shell companies. He was going to sell the North Field to himself at a fraction of the cost, use the wellness retreat as a tax haven, and launder money from an illegal betting ring in London. I was the one who set it up. I did all the legwork, and then he told me he was cutting me out. He said I was a liability because of my debts." James joined them, his expression grim. "So you killed him to stop the deal, or to take it over?" "I didn't kill him," Gavin shouted, drawing stares from a group of nearby bettors. "I wanted him alive. If he's dead, the shell companies collapse, the police audit the estate, and I'm the one who goes to prison for fraud. I needed that deal to go through so I could get my cut and vanish." Agatha's PR brain did a dizzying backflip. If Gavin needed Percy alive, he was the only person in the village who didn't have a motive for murder. Then who? Agatha started to ask, but her words were drowned out by a sudden screeching roar. A dark-coloured Land Rover, its windows tinted and its plates covered in mud, suddenly veered off the track access road. It didn't slow down. It accelerated, hurtling directly toward the small cluster of people where Agatha, James and Gavin stood. "Agatha, look out!" James lunged, his military training taking over. He tackled Agatha, sending them both sprawling into a patch of particularly deep, cold mud. Gavin wasn't as lucky. He stood frozen for a split second too long. The vehicle clipped him, sending him spinning through the air like a discarded rag doll before he landed heavily near the bookie's stand. The Land Rover didn't stop, it roared away, the engine screaming as it disappeared behind a row of horse trailers. Agatha scrambled up, her cream coat now a disaster of brown sludge. "Gavin!" They reached him just as the track's first aid team started to scramble. Gavin was conscious, but blood was trickling from a gash on his forehead. He gripped Agatha's mud-stained sleeve with surprising strength. It wasn't the mead, he wheezed, his voice fading. Check the second bottle, the one Penelope kept for herself. He slumped back, his eyes rolling into his head. Agatha stood up, ignoring the ruined coat and the stinging in her knees. She looked at James, who was covered in as much mud as she was. Well, Agatha said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and adrenaline. It seems the killer is moving from subtle poisoning to vehicular assault. And if Gavin is right, Penelope Pringle has been keeping a very deadly souvenir from her own party. 9. The bridge to a confession. Agatha Raisin did not do hiding. Despite the mud-caked ruins of her cream coat and a bruise on her thigh the size of a saucer, she refused to cower. Instead, she spent the evening in a whirlwind of high-stakes PR maneuvering. If the killer wanted to run people over in broad daylight, Agatha would meet them in the most dangerous arena of all, the Carsely Ladies' Bridge Club. It's a gamble, Agatha, James warned as he adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of the BMW. He looked remarkably composed for a man who had been tackled into a bog 3 hours prior. If you're wrong about the second bottle, you'll be sued for libel before the first hand is dealt. I am never wrong about social desperation, James, Agatha said, snapshotting her powder compact. She was wearing a structured crimson dress that screamed authority and a pair of earrings that looked like silver daggers. Penelope Pringle is a woman who collects exclusives. If there was a second, private bottle of that nectar, she wouldn't have shared it. She'd have tucked it away like a squirrel with a golden nut. The bridge club was held in the back room of the Red Lion. The air was thick with the scent of Earl Grey, lemon drizzle cake, and the lethal silence of competitive octogenarians. Penelope Pringle was already there, looking remarkably poised in a fresh beige twinset, her hands steady as she shuffled a deck of cards. Agatha marched in, James trailing behind like a reluctant but necessary bodyguard. The room went silent. Agatha, Penelope said, her voice a thin, icy stream. I heard about the incident at the racetrack. Truly harrowing. But surely you should be at home, perhaps with a compress. Ah, I'm far too busy for compresses, Penelope, Agatha said, pulling up a chair and sitting directly opposite her. I've been doing some crisis management for Siobhan Kelly. It turns out the police are very interested in the distribution of that nectar, specifically the bottle that wasn't on the silver tray. Penelope didn't flinch, but her thumb paused on the edge of a king of spades. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying, I'm stating, Agatha said, leaning forward. The rest of the bridge club missies, Bloxby, Doris Frome and Sheila Swinburne all froze, cards suspended in midair. Gavin Miller told me everything before he was accidentally struck by a Land Rover. He mentioned a second bottle. A special reserve that you kept back for yourself, Penelope, for a private toast with Percy after the guests left. Penelope's eyes flickered toward Sheila Swinburne, who was sitting 2 tables away, her face a mask of pale indifference. Percy and I had business to discuss, Penelope snapped, the directorship. It was purely professional. Was it? Agatha reached into her bag and pulled out the emerald dragonfly brooch. She didn't hand it over, she let it dangle from her fingers, catching the overhead light. Then why did Percy have this in his pocket? It's a dragonfly, Penelope. Your signature motif. He was going to give it to his partner after the announcement. A sharp, collective intake of breath echoed through the room. Sheila Swinburne stood up, her chair screeching against the floorboards. He bought that for her? Sheila's voice was low, vibrating with a decade of repressed rage. He bought it for the woman who was helping him scam the village. Sheila, Agatha said, her gaze never leaving Penelope. But here's the twist. Unctured was not just in Percy's flask. It was in the special bottle too. Someone wanted to make sure that even if Percy didn't drink the toast, his partner would. It was a double tap, wasn't it? A way to clear the board of both the cheating husband and the social rival. Penelope's face went from pale to a ghastly translucent white. I didn't drink it. I thought it tasted bitter. I poured it into the potted palm. And the palm died within an hour, didn't it? Agatha challenged. You realize someone had tried to kill you too. That's why you've been so quiet. That's why you were so eager to blame Siobhan. You were terrified the killer would come back to finish the job. This is madness, Penelope shrieked, her poise finally shattering. I didn't kill him! I loved his vision for the village. Why would I kill my ticket to the top? She wouldn't. A cold, calm voice interrupted. Agatha turned. Sheila Swinburne was standing by the tea urn, her hands clasped primly in front of her. She looked not like a grieving widow, but like a woman who had finally balanced her ledgers. Penelope is far too stupid to manage a murder, Sheila said, her eyes boring into Agatha's. She can barely manage a seating chart. But you, Agatha, you're almost as clever as you think you are. Almost. Sheila reached into her handbag. Agatha felt James move instinctively toward her, but Sheila didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small, amber-colored vial. Percy was a loud, greedy, pathetic man, Sheila said, her voice devoid of emotion. He was going to sell our history for a helipad and a mistress in beige linen. I didn't just want him dead. I wanted him humiliated. I wanted him to die in front of the very people he thought he was better than. And the Land Rover? Agatha whispered, her heart thumping. Gavin knew too much, Sheila said simply. He was the only one who saw me in the shed. I thought I had missed him today. It seems I'll have to be more thorough with the next one. Sheila looked at the vial, then at Agatha. You should have stayed in London, Agatha. You don't understand the roots of a village. Some things are meant to stay buried. Before James could reach her, Sheila unscrewed the cap and raised the vial to her lips. No! Agatha screamed, lunging across the bridge table, sending cards and teacups flying in a spectacular, chaotic arc of porcelain and crimson silk. Chapter 10. The final hand Agatha's lunge was not graceful. It was a desperate, high-heeled scramble that sent a plate of lemon drizzle cake spinning into Penelope Pringle's lap and knocked the card table flat. She collided with Sheila Swinburne just as the vial reached the widow's lips, the amber liquid spraying across the front of Agatha's crimson dress like a splash of rusted blood. The vial shattered on the floor. The bridge club erupted into a cacophony of shrieks and overset chairs. James was there a second later, his strong hands pinning Sheila's arms behind her back with the cold efficiency of a man who had handled much tougher insurgents than a murderous Cotswold socialite. Sheila did not struggle. She stood amidst the wreckage of the tea service, her face a mask of terrifying serenity. "You've ruined a perfectly good dress, Agatha," Sheila remarked, her voice chillingly steady. "But then, you always did have a flair for the tacky. And you have a flair for monksherd." Agatha panted, straightening her hair with trembling hands. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You didn't just kill Percy. You tried to wipe out the competition and the witness in one go." "The competition was an insult," Sheila spat, glancing at a trembling Penelope, "and the witness was a greedy little leech. This village was my life, Agatha. I wasn't going to let a man who didn't know the difference between a tithe barn and a warehouse tear it down for a mistress who buys her clothes in bulk." Detective Sergeant Bill Wong burst through the doors of the Red Lion, followed by 2 constables. He took in the scene: the overturned tables, the weeping socialites, the mud and mead-stained Agatha, and the restrained Sheila, with a look of weary resignation. "I assume I have you to thank for this, Mrs. Raisin?" Bill asked, though he was already signalling his men to take Sheila. "I've done your job for you, Bill," Agatha snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. She felt suddenly, sharply exhausted. "The Land Rover is in the Swinburne carriage house. The special reserve bottle is in Penelope's pantry. And I suspect you'll find a pair of very muddy gardening gloves in Sheila's laundry." As the police led Sheila away, the widow paused beside Agatha. For a moment the madness in her eyes flickered, replaced by a strange, dark kinship. "You'll find out soon enough, Agatha. The Cotswolds do not love you. They just tolerate you because you're loud enough to keep the boredom away." Agatha watched her go, the words stinging more than the bruises. The aftermath was, predictably, a social nightmare. Merworth was shunned by the regional in-crowd for months. Penelope Pringle moved to Marbella in a cloud of badger-tinted shame, and Siobhan Kelly, cleared of all charges, became a local hero, though she still refused to give Agatha a discount on her chutney. A week later, Agatha sat in her garden in Carsely, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across her lavender borders. The viper-red lipstick was back on, and she was nursing a large glass of gin poured from a bottle with a very reputable, non-local label. James Lacey leaned against the garden wall, looking at her with an expression that was almost, but not quite, tender. "Gavin Miller is going to be fine," James said. "He's agreed to testify against the London betting ring in exchange for a reduced sentence on the fraud charges." "Good for him," Agatha muttered. "Maybe he can buy a car that doesn't attract homicidal widows." "And you, Agatha. How are you?" Agatha looked at her garden, at the quiet, beautiful, maddeningly slow pace of village life. She thought of Sheila Swinburne's cold eyes, and the way the monksherd had looked in the moonlight, a reminder that under every picturesque village lay a layer of very old, very dark dirt. "I'm bored, James," Agatha lied, her jaw set with its usual pride. "This case was a distraction. I have a village fete to organise next month, and I hear the Belfry Committee is in an uproar over the new bell ringer." James smiled a genuine, rare smile that made Agatha's stomach do a little flip. God help the Belfry Committee. He turned to leave, but paused at the gate. "Agatha, you were brilliant. Annoying, tactless, and utterly reckless, but brilliant." He disappeared around the corner before Agatha could think of a retort. She sat in the silence, her pride momentarily soothed, her loneliness held at bay by the thrill of her latest triumph. She stroked Hodge, who had finally decided to grace her lap with his presence. Well, Agatha whispered to the cat, her blue eyes scanning the horizon for the next sign of trouble. If appearances matter so much in this place, I suppose someone has to be around to see through them. She took a sip of her gin, felt the sharp, clean burn of it, and smiled. Agatha Raisin was back in business, and heaven help anyone who dared to be boring in her presence. Chapter 11. The poisoned piece, the aftermath of a murder in the Cotswolds, was usually less about justice and more about property values. 2 weeks after Sheila Swinburne was escorted from the Red Lion, Merworth had become a ghost town not because of spirits, but because no one wanted to be seen near the Monkshood Manor. Agatha stood in the centre of Merworth's High Street, her arms crossed, surveying the damage. The Green Larder had a closed for restocking sign in the window, but the glass was dusty. Siobhan Kelly had fled to her sisters in Cornwall, unable to handle the way the villagers crossed the street to avoid her, as if murder were a contagious rash. It's the silence that gets you, isn't it? Agatha jumped, nearly dropping her designer shopping bag. It was Bill Wong, looking uncharacteristically somber in civilian clothes. "Bill! You nearly gave me a heart attack. Don't you have some paperwork to be filing, or a promotion to be accepting?" Agatha smoothed her silk scarf, her pride instantly bristling at being caught looking pensive. "I'm on a forced day off, Agatha. My super thinks I've spent too much time collaborating with unauthorized civilians." His words, not mine. Bill gestured to the empty street. "Sheila's trial won't be for months, but the village has already delivered the verdict. They have erased her. And Percy, and unfortunately Siobhan. People are sheep, Bill. RPR taught me that 30 years ago," Agatha said, though her voice lacked its usual cynicism. They loved Percy when he was bringing progress, and they hated him the second he became an inconvenience. Now they just want to pretend none of it happened, so they can go back to arguing about the height of their privet hedges. They walked in silence toward the village green. The rosebed where Percy had fallen had been completely dug up. In its place was a patch of fresh, dark mulch. It looked like a scar. "James is leaving, you know," Bill said quietly. Agatha froze. The air suddenly felt very thin. Leaving? Leaving where? The village? He can't leave. He has books to write. He has hedges to trim. Just a research trip to the Imperial War Museum in London. "A month, maybe 2, Bill corrected, seeing the genuine panic in Agatha's eyes and deciding to be merciful. "But he asked me to give you this." He handed her a small, cream-coloured envelope. Agatha's heart did a complicated gymnastic manoeuvre. She snatched it with a hand that she hoped was not trembling. "Well, I hope it's an apology for that tackle in the mud," Agatha muttered, tucking the note into her bag. "My dry-cleaning bill was astronomical. I'll leave you to it, Agatha. Try to stay out of trouble, or at least try not to find any more dead bodies until I'm back on the clock." Bill tipped an imaginary hat and wandered off toward his car. Agatha didn't wait. She found a secluded bench under a weeping willow tree, she thought, and tore open the envelope. "Agatha, the dust is settling, but the air in the Cotswolds still feels a bit heavy. I'm heading to London to clear my head and finish the chapter on the Peninsular War. You were, as always, a force of nature. Merworth might have been buried under its own secrets if you hadn't started digging. Try not to burn the village down while I'm gone. There's a bottle of decent Bordeaux on your doorstep. Drink it with the cats. It's better than the nectar." Agatha read the note 3 times. "A force of nature," she whispered. "It wasn't 'I love you,' and it certainly wasn't a proposal, but in the cryptic language of James Lacey, it was practically a sonnet." She stood up, her chin tilting upward. She wasn't going to pine. She was Agatha Raisin. She had a successful career behind her, a stylish cottage, and a wardrobe that was the envy of every woman within a 20-mile radius. If James wanted to go to London to look at dusty maps, let him. As she walked back to her BMW, she passed the village notice board. Someone had pinned a flyer for the upcoming Carsely Great Bake-Off. Beneath it, in frantic handwritten letters, was a complaint about the unfairness of store-bought puff pastry. Agatha pulled a gold-plated pen from her bag and scribbled a note on the bottom of the flyer. Store-bought is a sin, and so is beige linen. She got into her car, the engine purring with expensive satisfaction. She would go home, she would feed the cats, and she would drink the Bordeaux. And then she would start looking into the Belfry Committee. She had heard a rumour that the new bell ringer was a former convict from Birmingham, and if there was one thing Agatha Raisin couldn't stand, it was a mystery that didn't have her name written all over it. The Cotswolds might be peaceful, she thought, as she shifted into gear, but as long as Agatha Raisin was breathing, they would never, ever be boring. Chapter 12. The last glass of truth. Agatha's kitchen in Carsely was a temple to modern convenience and expensive granite, but tonight it felt like a cold cathedral. She sat at the breakfast bar. The bottle of Bordeaux James had left standing open between a bowl of slightly withered fruit and a stack of Vogue magazines. Hodge was currently using her left foot as a pillow, while Boswell was busy batting at the silk tassel of her dressing gown. "He's in London," Agatha informed the cats, pouring a generous measure of the deep red wine into a crystal glass. "Probably having dinner at Simpson's in the Strand with some dusty academic who wears elbow patches. He won't even be thinking about the Cotswolds. Or me." She took a sip. It was, as James had promised, exquisite. It had notes of dark cherry and a smoky finish that lingered on the tongue like a well-told lie. Agatha felt a familiar, sharp pang in her chest. It wasn't the wine, and it wasn't the bruise on her thigh. It was the quiet. In London, the quiet was something you paid for. In the Cotswolds, it was a free commodity that occasionally felt like a sentence. She stood up, the Bordeaux fueling a sudden surge of restless energy, and walked to the window. Across the road, the lights of the Red Lion were glowing warmly. She could almost hear the low hum of voices, the same voices that, a week ago, were calling for Siobhan Kelly's head, and are now, undoubtedly, dissecting the exact shade of Sheila Swinburne's madness. "I should have stayed in PR," Agatha muttered to her reflection. "I could be at a launch party in Mayfair right now, drinking watered-down gin and lying to journalists." It was much more honest than this, but she knew she was lying. The thrill of the chase the moment Sheila's mask had slipped, the sheer, intoxicating power of being the smartest person in the room was a drug she couldn't quit. A sharp knock at the door startled her. She checked her watch. Nearly 10. "If that's the vicar asking for a donation to the bell ringers, I shall scream," she told Boswell. She opened the door to find Mrs. Bloxby standing on the porch, wrapped in a sensible wool coat, holding a small foil-covered plate. "Agatha, dear, I saw your light. I thought you might like a slice of the lemon drizzle I made for the parish meeting. It's a new recipe, extra zest." Agatha felt her defences crumble. She stepped aside, ushering the vicar's wife into the kitchen. "Margaret, come in. I was just appreciating the Bordeaux James left." Mrs. Bloxby sat at the bar, her kind blue eyes taking in the scene. The half-empty bottle, Agatha's slightly smudged mascara, and the general air of a woman who had won the battle but was not sure about the war. "Hell be back, Agatha," Mrs. Bloxby said gently, accepting the small glass of wine Agatha offered. "James is like a homing pigeon. He flies off to London to remind himself why he left, and then he comes back because he misses the peace." "Or the drama," Agatha countered, sitting opposite her. "Perhaps. But you did a brave thing, Agatha. Sheila was a troubled woman, and Percy was, well, Percy. But you protected the truth. And you protected that girl, Siobhan." "I protected my own sanity, Margaret," Agatha said, her jaw setting. "I can't stand a messy narrative. It offends my professional sensibilities." They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, two very different women bound by the shared secrets of a small village. Agatha realized with a start that she didn't want Margaret to leave. She wanted to talk about the Belfry Committee, and the bake-off, and the fact that the new postman didn't seem to know the difference between a priority stamp and a second-class one. "Tell me," Agatha said, her eyes regaining their sharp, predatory spark. "Is it true that Doris Frome is entering her sponge cake into the bake-off? Because I happen to know she uses margarine instead of butter." Mrs. Bloxby chuckled. "It is a scandal, isn't it? But then, life in Carsely is rarely without its little deceptions." Agatha smiled. It wasn't the brilliant, artificial smile of a London PR maven. It was a real, slightly weary village smile. She took another sip of the Bordeaux and felt the warmth of it spread through her. James was in London. The murderer was in a cell. The village was safe, the cats were fed, and there was a cake-related fraud to expose. As Mrs. Bloxby eventually made her excuses and left, Agatha stood at the door, watching her walk back toward the vicarage. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted a lonely, sharp sound in the dark. Agatha closed the door and turned the bolt. She was flawed, she was lonely, and she was far too loud for her surroundings. But as she climbed the stairs to bed, followed by the silent shadows of her cats, Agatha Raisin felt a sense of grim determination. The Cotswolds hadn't defeated her yet. And if there was another body in a rosebed tomorrow, she'd be the first one there, heels on, lipstick applied, and ready to demand answers. "Because honestly, Hodge," she whispered, as she turned out the light, "who else is going to do it?